Hi, thank you for joining us on Irish Roots today. Today, I will be having a great conversation with Sharon Murphy, a musician, a singer, and an activist. Hi, Sharon, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Grace. Thanks for having me.
We're delighted that you're able to have a little conversation with us today. I'll give you a little brief rundown of how it's going to go. So I have a couple of questions for you. I'll just fire them at will, and we'll just talk and communicate and converse and get to know each other and let the people who are watching get to know you too.
Excellent.
Awesome. Okay, so the first question that I have is, can you tell us about your experience growing up?
I grew up in Clifton, County Connemara. I was born in England, and my mother brought me over to Ireland sometime between when I was a baby and 1 year old. And I was staying with her father and mother, my grandparents, and he basically didn't want a coloured child in the house. So I was sent into an institution where I lived for 15 years in Clifton, County Galway. And I have, you know, I think there was in the orphanage, I call it's called the industrial schools, but for those who may not understand what an industrial school is, it's basically an orphanage. And I grew up there. There was about 13 Black Irish in this particular institution. At least there was at least 13 of us, because at a very young age, I knew, even though I didn't have an understanding of what racism was, I didn't really have a language. I did feel, however, that we were different because of the way we were treated and because of the feelings of that treatment. I was about 6 when I realized that I was different and it didn't feel good.
Okay. And I mean, in some ways, I'm like, wow, you grew up with 13 kids who looked like you. Like that's, you know.
And what's very interesting, Grace, is that for many years there was a belief that there was no such thing as Black Irish. And a lot of the times, those people, like white Irish, probably were right in one sense because most of us were actually institutionalized. That itself has its own story. The separation out from our parents. My parents, for an example, like my mother, I know that there was a stigma against all mothers, who gave birth outside marriage, but there was an added stigma if you were Black. If a white mother gave birth to a Black child, because she was moving outside of her race. And it was unacceptable that a white woman would make love to an African man.
Yeah.
Because the ideology of white superiority was that shouldn't happen.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, go on.
No, go ahead. Continue.
And so that's part of my experience as a child. That's already part of my story, even though I don't have the language. That's already there. And so even though white kids were institutionalized like Black kids, the difference for us was that we were not seen as Irish. And so we were seen as different. And there were reports about us as well that reported about our behavior, the way that we behaved. So we were already segregated when it came to reports about us. We were always seen as different, and we were always seen as having a problem. We were seen as problematic, because of our differences.
Okay. And how long were you there for? How long? So you said that your mom brought you back to Ireland when you were 1. And then how long did you stay?
I was in the orphanage till I was 16.
Oh, wow.
Years old. Yeah.
And while you were in there, did you have communication with your mom, or was it just completely cut off?
No, I never met my mother actually until 2 months before she died. And I was 52 when I met my mother,
Oh my
you know,
goodness.
and my brother and sister. I didn't know I had a brother. I knew I had a sister when I was 14 because I was given information. And so I knew that racism had a huge role to play. My mother kept her two white children
Hmm.
and put me away. And so I knew, even at a very young age, when the social worker came to me at 14 and he came to tell me that I had parents, I had a white mother and white sister. He didn't mention a brother at the time. I knew something was off,
Mm.
you know. I knew.
Yeah. And did they ever give you any information about your father?
I don't, even till this day, my mother would not give me any information, which is disappointing, really, because I never asked her for anything, you
Mm.
know. And I feel that it would have been. It's not like I was. It really, in a way, had nothing to do with her. Me looking for my father had to do with my story and
Yeah.
my sense of who I am and where I came from. But she wasn't able to, because for her own reasons, she wasn't able to share that with me. She kept saying that she'll think about it, but she never did. And my sister and brother told me that I would have been very lucky if she actually had given me that information. They themselves didn't know their fathers, and they lived
Okay.
with her. So she was a person who kept quite a lot of things secret for her own reasons, you know.
Yeah.
Now it was a beautiful experience, I might add, meeting her.
Mm.
It was really a lovely moment, but that's all it was, a moment.
Yeah.
But I was glad at least I had that, and that I met her. I never expected to meet her. I gave up meeting her. I had looked for her a few times and came up against brick walls, so I gave up, you know.
Mm.
And so at 52, I get a phone call from Bernardo's to say my mum wants to meet me. I say, fine, whatever, you know.
Mm. Wow.
But what was really interesting about that is that I was actually recording. I have a song called Mama, and I wrote it when I was about 25 years old. I know, maybe even younger. But up till then, the impact of not having a mother I didn't feel it. I didn't feel that I had missed anything. And I was writing a song, and I had intended to write about the orphanage and just trying to um, put my experiences, what I had experienced there, just put it on paper and try and express it and let it out. And the song just took a complete turn. And within 10 minutes, I had a song called Mama.
Oh
And
wow.
I was absolutely devastated. I broke down for hours. I cried and cried for hours because it was the first time I realized that I needed a mother, you know. And so there was a healing in the sense in it, is that I really felt a sense of relief because I thought I was stone cold.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, you know, and in a way it really was a letting go and beginning to realize that my grief was still in my body. I just hadn't felt it. It was so blocked, you know, and my music allowed me to just release that. And it was a very healing time.
Okay. That's, I mean, they say these things come out when we least expect them to,
Yeah.
and you know, the processing of emotions through song is just, it's such a wonderful tool to have. It's amazing that you had it. So going back to you got out of the orphanage when you were 16, and then what happened? So where, how did your
Well,
what?
then I went to, I left at 16. Well, the nuns came to me and said, do you want to leave school, or do you want to do your leaving cert or leave? And I said, I'm leaving. I'm out of here. So I left at 16 and I went to Galway and I went into a factory. It was called Wranglers at the time. It's closed.
Mm.
And I was there 6 months and I realized, oh, this isn't going to work for me. I actually need to go back to school because I'm going to be stuck in factory work for the rest of my life if I don't get some kind of education. Growing up, there wasn't any expectations. I was always believed that I was not a very bright person. And so I believed it wholeheartedly that I actually wasn't an intelligent human being. But I still went back to school, and I went back to school in Galway City, where I left Clifton and I came to Galway City, and I went back to school after 6 months. And it was a really good eye opener because I got honors in that. I did a secondary. My results, like, we had a group cert. That's as far as I got in Clifton. We don't do group certs today, but there was a group cert, and then you went and you did an inter cert, and then you did eventually your leaving. So I just got to group cert. My results were a disaster, an absolute disaster. And so when I went back to school, I came out with honors in bookkeeping, in commerce, in English, and I was like stunned. I actually thought they had made a mistake. But what I realized at that age, and I was about 17 at that stage when I did my first year, first of all, it really allowed me to begin to see that something was amiss, that maybe I wasn't stupid, maybe I was okay. And that was a really positive learning in my life. And I think the reason I came out well is, first of all, I wanted to be there. I wasn't stupid. Secondly, the teachers didn't have a history attached to me. They saw me just as an individual. I wasn't attached to an institution, and so therefore I wasn't being judged accordingly. So there was an opening on both sides. And that's why I think I was able to relax and do well.
Mm.
And then from there on, I left that after 2 years. It was a secretarial course, and to be honest with you, I have no interest in secretarial course. So I left after the second year. I left, and in a way, then things got a little bit skewed for me, because I just signed on, and then I would just do jobs here and there. Very unsettled, very unsettled, all the time, having to deal with racism. It was never not there. For me, it was a lived experience. I always had to negotiate around racism, try and find safe spaces, trying to find safe people to be with, so that I could fend myself from the abuse that I was experiencing. And so for me, there was a lot of insecurity because of racism, because of having to negotiate the pain of it, and also, living this experience, I honestly, kind of in isolation, because it's not something that people really want to talk about. And if you do talk about it, they tend to minimize it or explain it away. And so
almost justify it, like, oh, they didn't mean that, or
exactly.
it's because of this, or they do that because XYZ, and it's like, oh no, let's just get to the root. They do that. They've said these
Yeah.
things, or they, and my experiences are valid. Yeah. So sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, you're free. I love that you actually engage with me, Grace. I really like that. So interrupt all you like. But I was like, for an example, Grace, when we were young, and I would share with friends, they call me this, they call me that. There was always like an explanation, but should they call me this and they call me that, right? And in a way, it was to cancel out the experience of your experience. But what I realized growing up and looking back is that the words, and this, the words that were used to insult me had to do with my skin color, had to do with my hair texture, it had to do with my physical features. And I knew this at a very young age, because these words nigger, black, blackie, darkie, gollywog, black tar baby. All of these words were as familiar to me as my name. And I knew at a certain time, as a child, I knew that those words had to do with my skin color, because only people who looked like me were insulted by these words. And so I knew it had something to do with my skin. And that's the difference between a white child being insulted and a black child being insulted.
Yeah, I always like
You're,
I had this conversation with somebody pretty recently about this situation, and it's like if I if I do something silly and you want to, take the piss out of me or slag me or whatever for doing something silly, like that's on you. Like that's, you can do that to everyone. But when you attack me for my skin color or my hair texture, like those are all things that I can't like change, that I didn't, I didn't do this to myself. I'm born this way. So that's the difference. Like you're saying, that's the difference between a racial attack and just an attack on a person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say, I love your hair. It's beautiful, and I love the style. So but I know the pain that you would have had to go through, and the pain that I had to go through. Like for an example, when I was a child, when I was growing up in Clifton, I was called Anne Murphy, right? And it is my name. Sharon Ann Murphy is my name, but I didn't know Sharon Ann Murphy was my name until I got my birth cert off the orphanage. But once when I saw that my name was Sharon at the age of 16, I changed it straight away, because Anne Murphy always brought ridicule. Anne Murphy I was always reminded that, oh my God, you have such a common Irish name. Where did you get that? How did you get that? And so it brought attention, unwanted attention to me. And so I thought at 16, I'll change my name to Sharon Murphy. Maybe people won't ask me, where did the name come from? How did I get it? You
Yeah.
know? And at 16 years of age, that I actually had to shift. I had to change my identity in order to try and protect myself from being laughed at again, because it was so familiar. People don't understand that Black Irish have to make shifts. They have to go through certain experiences. They have to do certain things to stay safe in this country, you know?
And it's almost like once you make those shifts, it's hard to unshift, if that makes sense. Like
Mm.
I find myself making these shifts and getting like to the point, like even just to go back to my hair, like I hated my hair growing up. I was constantly straightening it, constantly putting relaxers in it or braids or anything to get away from this. And it's only in recent years that I've really come to love and embrace my hair, and I really do now. Like I wear it with honor. And I love when it's out, and I love when it's big, and I love when it's wild. I still do get weird comments thrown at me, and people say such inappropriate racist things, not even realizing that they're being racist. They just think it's funny. But like, would you say the same thing to a white person about their hair? No, you probably wouldn't. So um but I then find myself in other situations like that, like where people would say comments, and I don't really know how to respond to that. Like I've shifted so far to protect myself, I don't know how to go back to respond. I don't even know if that makes sense.
I'm not sure I follow you. Explain more. Say more.
So I'll give you an example. So I lived in the States for 6 years. That's where I really came into my own and got to loving my curls and loving my hair. And then to come back here and have to, I guess, almost still feeling like I wear my hair and I am proud of it, and that I have to then people saying stuff to me about my hair. I get it's like it takes me away from the shift that I've made. Does that
Yeah,
make
I
sense?
got you. I understand now. I know what you're saying. Yeah. Like, I think one of the things that comes up for me is as an anti-racist worker. I tend to use the word whiteism / racism, because oftentimes when we're talking about racism, white people don't see that it's really good. White people don't see that it has anything to do with them, because they see it as an individual behavior towards other individuals. But I've stopped looking just at the suffering and pain that brown and dark-skinned brown people have to go through, and I'm spending more time looking at the ideology of white superiority. That's there for a reason. And so to deconstruct that, you have to understand, we have to look at how white people are privileged by racism.
Yeah.
And we don't pay attention to that. So when there's a racist incident, it's about the suffering of the Black person. And that's important, but that's where it ends. And so we never deal with the privilege. White people are privileged by racism. They're privileged, they benefit from racism. But that part of the conversation, that collective conversation is absolutely not on the table. It's hard enough to talk about racism experienced by brown and dark-skinned people. It's hard enough in public to even have that conversation, but to have a conversation about how privileged white people are when it comes to racism, that's like a taboo. But
yeah,
if white people don't see white privilege as a problem, then they're not going to see themselves as part of the solution of dismantling racism. And that's
I guess,
why I really, sorry,
go on ahead. Sorry, you really feel.
No.
No, I was going to say, I guess that brings us on to the next question that I had for you, and that is that you work as an anti-racist activist for the Galway One World Centre. Can you talk about that and about the work that you do there? Considering, I mean, we were just talking about whiteist and whiteism and all that stuff. So I think it's a good way to get us to the next question.
Yeah, so I've been doing anti-racism work for, I'd say maybe 15, 16 years. And but a lot of the work that I have done, I've had to learn. I've had to study, and I have had to do the research. Nobody was there. I was invited into the centre, which was a good centre. It's a development educational centre, so it does non-formal work like human rights, unfair tariffs, trade. Basically, it's really focusing on the unequal power relationship between the global north and the global south. Mm-hmm. And within that, we look at unfair trade, human rights, racism, and we go around to communities and to schools and universities doing these workshops. You know, I give sometimes talks like this, and sometimes I give talks with my music, performance talks, when you could. And so, like recently now, I did a 3-day work on whiteism, inviting white people only to come to a 3-day work training on looking at themselves, paying attention to, for an example, how racism shows up or how the ideology shows up in their bodies, you know. And so that's what I do. When I look at this oppression, it's really, really important for white people to begin to understand that while racism doesn't treat us the same way, it still impacts on their lives because they are socialized to see themselves as superior. And so if this is the truth, how does that play out in their lives? How does it show up in terms of white people's beliefs about themselves? How does the ideology of white superiority show up in a sense of entitlement? You know, for an example, what does it feel like to live in a society where you are the white hope? What does it feel like to be always seen as the one that's developed, that is the giver of aid and not the receiver of aid? How does it feel to live in a society where you are socialized to see yourself as an individual, while as a group benefiting from policies and practices within our institutions because you belong to that group? And so these are really important questions that we really need to put out there. And those questions really need to be asked and need to be answered, because otherwise the ideology of white superiority will stay hidden and people will feel it's nothing to do with me. And I'm sorry that Black people are being wounded and being hurt, but I didn't do it. But even if you didn't do that, you were shielding those that do that.
Exactly. And I think that brings us back to what you were saying earlier, your point about you know, having the conversation, and how the conversation, whenever a racist incident happens, it usually ends with this person had this racist thing done to them, period, like full stop. That's their, you know, and that's the conversation. But you're right, there needs to be a further conversation that brings it to about why this person is being racist, why that this racism is allowed, and how do white people change that?
Because it's not a Black person's problem. It's a white people's problem. Like, I'm not saying all white people are in denial, but there's so many, you know. That's why it's so difficult to live in a society, because so many white people are in denial around the privilege side of it, because it's a hard thing to actually have to deal with, you know. And you know, when we look at racism in society, I mean, for many years, I've always grown up hearing that there's no such thing as racism in Ireland. Well, that's not true. And like today, we might agree that that's not true, but there's a reluctancy to see racism as something that, in fact, I would say that all of us on this island were born into a racist society, just as we were born into a sexist and a homophobic society. It was here before we got here, you know, so it's impossible for us to escape. But one of the most powerful privileges of whiteness, of whiteism, is charity organizations. You probably already know this. Charity organizations, they're one of the most powerful institutions in Ireland in how they use image, information, and messages.
Yep.
You know, for like Trócaire, Concern, Goal, Bóthar, all have one thing in common. They use their advertising campaign, to promote an African dependency on white people. They do this through their images on their billboards, Trócaire boxes. We know Trócaire boxes. I've had them for 40 years. They've been in my life. And for always, the images on these boxes have been absolutely appalling in how that they have portrayed African people as primitive, totally in despair, and poverty-stricken. They have been the major. But actually, Grace, when I was young, they had on these boxes, they had white people on these boxes holding Black babies, feeding Black babies, nursing Black babies. For years, I grew up with those images. Those images stopped, but they're still not good. And I remember somebody saying to me, you know, Sharon, that's all changed now. Trócaire and Concern now are more susceptible to the image. And I said to myself, I said to the person, I said, you don't need to put an image of a Black person in despair on Trócaire. The word Trócaire is enough to conjure up the image. They're that powerful. And so we have grown up in society in Ireland. We've all grown up receiving these images. They've gone into our schools, our community centres, they've gone into our churches, and they have been on the mantelpiece in our homes, year in and year out, right?
Yeah, and we have a big group of people thinking only this of African people, only this image of these poor kids, or like you said, these white people saving these black kids. And just because they removed the white people from the picture, it doesn't mean that they've removed the sentiment of the fact that it is the white people who are saving these African kids, and that's all that Africa is, and it's just simply not true.
I remember just doing a little bit of research on the charity organizations, and I went to Boer, and Boer is a Boer, yeah, and a lot of their imagery is in cartoon form. I don't watch TV, and actually that was one of my main reasons. I found it really offensive. I couldn't keep watching television, looking at ads and how they portrayed African people, whether it was Hollywood, whether it was whoever. But anyway, I did a little bit of research looking at Boer, and they were showing the kind of works that they were doing around the globe, right? What was interesting is that they focused their advertising on going to the African continent, okay? That's usually their ad. But if you look at what they're doing, a lot of their work are doing in Eastern Europe. They're supporting groups of people there. But you wouldn't know that these charity organizations actually also support white people, because we don't get that image. And so when they show that side, and when they don't give the whole picture, like for an example, when they don't use their advertising also to inform us, the public, as to why most of these countries in the African continent are poor, as in why they're linked and how they're linked with unfair tariffs, unfair trade, unfair subsidies that for decades have increased incredible wealth, have made the Western country so wealthy at the expense of African countries. And when you don't get that whole picture, then these charity organizations, they reinforce the ideology of white superiority and black inferiority. They reinforce the ideology that whites pretty much does it all for black people. Blacks can't do it for themselves. And that is racist. That is racist. And because of this, I believe that Irish people, this has had a profound influence on how white Irish people view African people in this country and how they view African people abroad.
Absolutely. I mean, we could literally have a 3, 4, 5 hour conversation about the charities alone, but we'll move along. And I wanted to talk to you about your music and your songs. How, because you mentioned earlier about your song Mama. How did you start? How did you get into music and writing songs?
Well, it's interesting because when I was in the orphanage, I used to play the piano, and there was an older black Irish. She was just 2 years older than me, but when you're young, that's huge, you know. But she used to pick up the guitar and write songs, and I used to imitate her, you know. And so eventually, when I left the orphanage, I bought myself my first guitar for £5, and I started to play with it. But I was quite, you know, I was kind of in my 20s when I started to really write songs. I didn't write my first song was actually a religious song, because I was charismatic once upon a time. I'm not today, but I did write a song that I still love that came out, and that was my first song. Like I was nearly 25 before I wrote my first song, because actually I was slow, because not because I couldn't do it, but because I didn't think I was meant to. I didn't think that it was my, you know, that was something that I could do. No one ever said it to me. And then actually what was interesting is around that time, 3 people in my life within 2 weeks said to me, "When are you writing your songs?" Like, I used to sing, but when are you going to do your own songs? I used to sing a lot of Joan Armatrading and Dylan and Bob Marley. And And because it happened in such a short space of time, 3 different people, and I thought, they think I can write. Why can't I think? And so my first song, 10 minutes, I loved it. I went to bed that night. I actually couldn't sleep. I was so excited. I'm a singer, songwriter, hooray. Who would have known? So that was it. And so when I wrote Mama, I'd say I was about 25, 20, no, I was actually 26, 27, because I had moved I had moved away from Galway, and then I moved back to Galway. And that was an amazing experience, because that took 10 minutes. Songs that take 10 minutes, it's almost like they're going to happen without you, If you open the space, they're just going to come out. And in that, I always saw how this was a gift. In fact, the way that the songs would come out of me, almost had nothing to do with me. I was just, the words would pop into my mind and I would just write them. So I can't really take credit, because it's a gift, And the thing about my music is I felt, oh my God, I have a way of dealing with stuff. I have a way of dealing with the loss of my parents. I have a way of dealing with racism. And that's what I did. And so a lot of my songs are about racism, about homophobia, about sexism, about the loss of my family, like I said, but also about relationships and love. So I have a variety of songs.
It's so important, and I love that vision of the words just popping into your head and you just being the conduit, and just almost word vomiting them out, and for them to be so beautiful. This is just wonderful stuff. It's amazing. I'm very excited that you got to have that way of processing stuff, and of getting the message out so people can hear it, because there's a lot to be said about songs and things that they do for us. Which I guess brings me to my next question: is do you have any advice for young people who might look like you or I, and have songs in their hearts?
I wouldn't know. I don't tend to give advice to people, because I think they'll work it for themselves. But what I would say is that there are those people who are older that have experienced racism, and we're here. If they ever wanted to share, if they ever wanted to talk, we're not that far away. And I just want to say, I find the young people, it really excites me to see so many different tones in our country. I actually just love going in town and just seeing the diversity. And I also include white Irish in that, under the umbrella of diversity, because nobody has no color. We all have a tone, And I think it's what I love to see is white young people coming together and just being in their space and taking that space for themselves. When I was young like them, I kind of hid, I was afraid to be seen. And the racism, how it worked, is that even if 2 Black people met on the streets, I would nearly avoid them, because meeting up with another Black person always drew extra negative attention.
Yeah.
That's the power of it, And today, that's not there. Now, there are issues that young Black people have to deal with. Now, I use the word Black. I know other people have other words for themselves, but that's the word I use for me. Until somebody tells me something different, that's the word I use.
Yeah, and I don't even think that like somebody needs to tell you something different. I guess my next question is about identity, and we can talk about it a little bit more when we get to there. But yeah, no, continue, finish your.
Well, I would say that don't doubt their experience. If they feel that they're experiencing racism, the chances are they are. And it's important for us to remember that 80% of the experience of racism is nonverbal. It's a vibration. And racism is communicated through vibration, not necessarily vocal, which is why it's so difficult to prove, you know. All I have to do is to go outside and have a car pass me. I know whether that person is racist or not. I'm very, very equipped, and I'm very learned in the non-spoken language, you know, because I've had all of my life to learn the language. I know it when I see it. It's like, for an example, if you walk into a pub and you feel, oh God, I don't like the feel of this. Come on, let's go somewhere else. That's how racism plays out. You don't like the feel, something's happening. You have that look. You have that expectation that you're not moving fast enough off the path. I mean, Grace, for many years, I used to, when I walked the streets, I always found myself leaving, getting off and letting people pass. I put it down to being mannered, having manners. But one day I thought to myself, I was with my partner. Actually, I was with my partner for some time, and I realized she doesn't have that feeling of moving off the streets. What's going on here? And why do I always feel that I have to pull her off, give way? And then one day I stopped. I realized, actually, I'm getting off the streets because I'm afraid. What am I afraid of? So I decided I would do a little bit of research. And so I stopped moving. And I'm not lying, but two people came towards me and realized that they were that close and moved away, and they were apologetic and fine. Other people just looked at me and stared at me with hostility. And two people, a man and a woman, refused to let me pass. Now, if I'm experiencing fear, if I'm experiencing a need to move aside and let white people pass, what's going on for white people in that moment? What is it that they're feeling? What's triggering for them? What is it that's being said to them in that moment? The moment that I refuse.
It's almost like an expectation that you're going to move, make way for them,
Exactly.
without it being like, make way for me, I am amazing and I'm white. It's not like, I'm not even saying that that's the thoughts that go into their brain, but it's just that an expectation, like
it's just, and it's not even conscious.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not consciously saying move away. They're not even there. It's only because I challenge the stereotype, I challenge the ideology, and something happens that wakes them up, and they respond differently. And so these two people that decided that they weren't passing, I said, well, we're here for the day. How do you do? I'm staying. And I was going to stay the day. I made that decision. And they knew it. And then they moved off. Very hostile. And I thought, this is how whiteism shows up in white people's bodies. You know, this is an example. And interestingly enough, I don't know if you've ever heard a guy called Rasma Rasma Manica. He's an African American psychotherapist who's brought out a book called My Grandmother's Hands. And in his book, in his talks, he actually talks about himself and his wife doing the same thing, walking on the streets. And he always passed. He didn't know that he was actually in relationship with whiteism and racism. He didn't know until his wife said, if you move one more time, I will drag you back onto that path. And he didn't even know what she was talking about. And then he realized, he did his work and realized, oh, wow, this is what we're doing. And so this is the unspoken privilege that white people get not to have to see. And
yeah, you're actually, you're blowing my mind a little bit, because the more I think about it, I do that all the time, whether it's walking down the street or walking into a shop. And like yourself, I always put that down to, oh, I'm, it's just mannerly. I'm just being good mannered. Yeah, if I'm being good mannered, and I'm assuming they're being good mannered too, so why should they not? move out of my way. So I mean, that's a test that I'm gonna definitely take on, and the next time I'm walking down the street to see what happens, and
Just to see
be
what happens.
aware.
Yeah, because they're not aware. Many of the time they're not aware. And it's like, for an example, I've been with my partner for, I'd say, must be 25, 26 years now, right? And it's only in the last couple of years that she gets it. So that's how difficult it is to actually talk about white privilege. It's only in the last few years, but once she got it, it's like she sees it everywhere, because she had to deal with the pain, because she thought that by me talking about whiteism meant that she was a bad person.
Mm.
It's not about bad people. It's obviously she loved me and I'm a black person. And there are many white people who love black people. So obviously it's not about hate or love. It's about a society, it's about a socializing.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being born into something that is creating pain and suffering for a group of people at the expense of another group of people. Wouldn't you want to know that? Wouldn't you want to know about that? And wouldn't you then want to do something about it? That's what it's about.
100%.
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass. Not sure if you're familiar with Frederick Douglass, but he had this. There's the one quote that always stuck in my mind about what he said, and he said, "Racism was in the air, and men and women were breathing it in unknowingly." And I almost feel like that's what happened. It's like the racism was all around, and everyone was just breathing it in, and like you said, like not even consciously being like, I'm not going to let this person by me on the path, but it's you've breathed it in, it's soaked in inside you, and you don't even know it.
Exactly. And and oftentimes even brown and black, I use the word brown skinned and dark skinned people.
Hmm.
And um and even then we don't know sometimes that we're carrying stuff like I'll give you an example that really blew my head. I was 40, I think about 40 when I went to America, and I've been there many times, and I wanted to meet African Americans because I
Hmm.
love the culture. Oh my God, there's nothing about them that I don't love. I think they're brilliant. I think they're so creative. I love their style. I love what they do. I love the way they talk and everything. And I thought, something, every time I come to America, I stay with my white friends, my white Irish friends. This time I'm going to Harlem. So I
Hmm.
took a train from Manhattan to Harlem. And on the train, when I went on, most of the people were white, which is very familiar to me. So I thought nothing of it until the closer I got to Harlem, I realized that most people on the train were black. And all of a sudden, I started to feel this intense terror. This terror just came right up. And it got so bad that all I could do was look outside the window. I didn't look left or right because I was terrified that if they saw me, that they would attack me, rob me, and possibly even rape me. And I'm
Hmm.
sitting here on my own thinking, terrified. And when I got off the train, the fear totally evaporated, but it left me very disturbed. I'd never met African Americans before, so where did I get that information? I got
Exactly.
this information in Ireland. In other words, I learned growing up in this country to be afraid of people who look like me.
Hmm.
And if I grew up afraid of people who looked like me, then it's fair to say that white people have grown up terrified of people who look like me. It can't be any
Absolutely.
other way, It cannot be any other way.
I mean, I've been through that experience too. I'm sure we all have, with having that unknown fear that we don't know why or where it came from. But we just had a conversation there to really delve into it. And I really urge people to do more work and to really discover more about that. So I guess the final question that I have for you is about identity. And the reason I ask you that is because it's in the last couple of months, it's been something that I've been struggling with. Um, as I grew up you know, when I was younger, I always just wanted to be white. I never wanted to acknowledge the black side of me, even though my dad was very much present in my life. He's Nigerian. He passed away recently, but he was from Nigeria, and he was up here, but he worked all the time. Didn't really have a connection to our Nigerian side. We were raised by our white and surrounded by all of our cousins who were all white, aunties and uncles all white, friends in school all white, and so I just wanted to be white. And like for a while, I just thought I was like everyone else until, like you said, somebody points out something or says something racist, and then you realize, oh, actually, I'm different. I'm not white. I am something other. And then as I kind of grew up, I kind of got into this like, oh, I'm mixed race. When I moved to the States, I dropped that and I really embraced my blackness, you know, and I was surrounded by people who were black, and it was great. I was surrounded by white people as well, but it was a very different type of experience for me. The people that I surrounded myself with were very multicultural and came from all different ways, all had great ways of thinking about people, and I just felt more like a black woman. And then I came back to Ireland and it's like, oh no, you're not a black woman, you're mixed. And then I'm like, oh, I'm mixed. Like, I hate that word. It's like I'm not whole. Like I'm a dolly mixture, or like I'm a cake. And you know,
it's like
I
half
don't
caste, isn't it?
exactly, like I'm half of this and I'm half of that, and then I but am I a whole? Like what am I? And then the race thing and the human race and race is a social construct, and I yeah, so that's where I'm coming from with this whole like let's talk about identity, because I really am interested to hear what your thoughts are about identity and how you identify.
I be honest with you, Grace, I still struggle with my identity. I
Okay.
struggle, I try to let go my need um to be accepted as Irish. And that's just not going to happen, not in my lifetime.
Mm,
Because the stereotype of Irishness is whiteness.
mm,
And if you don't fit that stereotype, you're excluded. And it's not like people come up to me and say you're not Irish. Well, actually, some do,
yeah.
but it's knowing that you are not represented as an Irish person in this country. When you look at the media, when you listen to
Hmm.
politics, in fact, when you listen to even the radio, what tends to happen is you have the so-called experts, white experts, not only speak about issues that concern them, but they speak about issues that concern people across the globe and feel totally entitled to have that conversation amongst themselves, where we're not even included. We're not
Hmm.
even invited to have that conversation when we're talking about ourselves. So it's very hard for me to locate myself here and feel that I belong. I
Mm,
don't feel that I belong. I want to try, and I think for the rest of my life, I'll probably be letting go my need
yeah.
for my countrymen, for my white countrymen and women to see me as one of theirs.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's going to happen. And so for me, I live with the loss, and I do live with the pain of that, you know. And I guess because I'm I'm going to be 59 in June,
Mm,
so and I kind of, there was a time when I waited to be invited in, to be accepted. And then there's a time when I realized I'm not going to waste my energy. I'm just going to try and be real to myself. I guess my struggle is to learn to accept who I am, and is to learn to love myself. That's where I'm at. I am very spiritual, and I believe in a source. I believe in a mother source. And I believe that I am held, and I believe that there is a reason for who I am.
mm,
And I see that I know that I belong here,
mhm.
that I am an earth being, and that I belong here too. And that's where it starts for me. I
Mm.
don't know if that makes sense with you, but
Oh, absolutely.
I don't feel that I belong to what is defined as Irish.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't and again I think it's like we talked about earlier, it's not even like there are, of course, the odd few who are like, "You're not Irish," or we get that, "Where are you from? Where are you really from?" question. Um, but it's deeper than that. It's like you said, it's the lack of representation in the media. It's the lack of representation in our politics, and it's one thing that I've noticed as well. So from being back here, from this living in the States for 6 years, like I walk into a shop and there's an array of magazines, and there might be one magazine that has a black person on it, but for the most part there are very few. Like a lot of the times there are no other than white people on the front of magazines. And I'm like, oh, this is so weird. Or I watch the news and all of the newscasters are all white, and I'm like, this is so bizarre. Why is there nobody up there who looks like me? And it brings me back. I have this saying that I always say to people, or I have it. You probably noticed it. It's at the bottom of my emails. But if you can see it, you can be it. And I think it's just so important for the generations coming up behind us, because, like you said, it's probably not going to be any different in anytime soon. But hopefully we can start making some big changes and start seeing ourselves, or our kids can start seeing themselves in the media, in TV shows, in politics, as a TD. Like all of those things it needs a revamp. Like the whole system needs a revamp to showcase like what Ireland is today. Because the other side of it is, like, I was in the States for 6 years and it was very much not really accepted in Irish spaces over there either, and it's because the world has an idea of what Ireland looks like, and that is white.
Yeah. And what was I going to say? I actually think this notion of feeling that I like Ireland takes on the language of we, the developed West, right? And there was a time when they themselves were oppressed by the Western world, yeah, by England. And I think it's a pushback from that place where for hundreds of years Irish people have felt a sense of inferiority, have felt themselves insecure when it came to England. And I know this because my oppression lies with Irish people, but I would be in company of white Irish people where they would feel intimidated by English people. And I used to be surprised because my pain was with Ireland, not with England. And I think that Ireland hasn't dealt with its sense of inferiority when it comes to England, and I think so it's projected onto the African continent. It's a role that they can play where they can see themselves as superior, because that's the image, that's the message, and that's why I think that's why they speak for African people, even today, because they feel that they're the givers, when in fact they're not. They're actually the receivers. But that's for another talk.
Absolutely. Well,
I need to
Sharon,
ask you, Grace,
yes,
before you go, have you written a book? Have you written
not
a book?
not yet. Well, I've written a lot of children's books, none of which are published yet. And definitely book writing is on the agenda for future.
Have you done TED Talks by any chance?
No, why do you think I should?
I think you should, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
One of these days I will. I have a lot to say, I tell you that much.
But will it be really nice for us to stay in contact as well?
Absolutely, 100%, Sharon. I would really appreciate that. It's been an absolute honor, amazing experience, wonderful moment of being in this virtual room with you. I'm so happy that I got to share it with you, and to everyone else who's watching at home. I hope you enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
have to say it's been a pleasure with talking with you, Grace. It's because it's lovely and easy, and that's the way it really is that's the way I like it, when it's just easy chatting. So
Awesome.
thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for tuning in to Irish Roots. Irish Roots is a completely volunteer-led festival. If you can donate, please do. For more information and to see what else is happening, jump over to our website. It's www.iamirish.org. From all of us at I Am Irish, Gurav Mila Mahagut.